The Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network does so much to bring people from all different backgrounds together to discuss some of the most important issues going on in this community.
The network plays a vital role in not only providing a forum for dialogue and networking itself, but it also creates the opportunity for us to pull together as a community to address issues that happen and incidences that occur in Indianapolis and Marion County and even the contiguous counties, because the network has a broad reach.
There's always an opportunity to learn about an issue, and that's what I like. We don't often make time for our own education in our busy lives, and this is just an hour and a half that's carved out of every month where we get to connect and learn with our peers.
I think what the network also does is tries to give everybody around the table some information and tools to be proactive when possible.
The network has really evolved in being a voice for everyone and being really a voice for inclusion, not saying that we recognize that everybody's different, but saying that what we really recognize is these differences are all one community.
Power and intellect and great ideas and things for the benefit of the whole come from all elements of the community and the society. And when we're open to all of that, then we learn things, all of us.
The network, by virtue of its existence, has been a game changer as it relates to how our community deals with race and cultural relations.
I've been with the network since the very beginning. I was a co-chair for Vision Indianapolis Tomorrow, which was a community-based strategic planning project that was launched during the Goldsmith administration.
In the early 90s, there was a view that the crafting of that vision was a little bit too controlled and not participatory enough. So the Race Relations Network was part of the larger Visioning Network.
The idea of the Vision Indianapolis Tomorrow project was to allow community members to brainstorm the question, how do we want Indianapolis to look in the 21st century? And out of this brainstorming came a vision statement for the city, which saw Indianapolis in the 21st century as an open, harmonious, welcoming community with respect for all of its citizens.
The conversation was kind of like a continuing conversation about how we have incidents happen between the police department and the community, and everybody gets upset. Then you turn to the mayor and ask the mayor to appoint a task force that we've had numerous ones.
It started in the Bank One Tower with a group of community and business leaders around a boardroom table.
Most of the corporate CEOs in the community committed and came to the meetings. But you remember, Dan, those days were days we leave the meetings with headaches because it would just be a big argument between us and the police people about police community relations and the denial that we had a problem.
In the fall of 1995, the board of GIPC authorized the establishment of the Race Relations Leadership Network. And things going on there. There was a big issue involving the police department.
That's what I think woke up the corporate business community leadership and said, we can't have this. We're trying to promote Indianapolis as a place for tourism. We can't have police beating up on people like this. And so ironically, it's like, okay, hello, what have we been trying to tell y'all for years? But now you see it because it's affected your own community.
It was right down south of Washington Street. I can't remember the specifics, but it was a bad scene.
Dan Ephraimson at the time was a key contributor to the infrastructure necessary to do it, and GIPC played the organizing role. So there were issues with respect to how far out to look 20 years, but there are also issues about, well, how will this change things tomorrow for me in my neighborhood? Folks that lend their voices to an organized activity then need to see the results even though the vision is downstream.
The value was getting us together in a room, a small group of people who had a lot in common but came from different places. And we left there understanding that we had a lot in common, and these little epiphanies that that the conversations allowed us to have.
Here again, we sit around a table with a bunch of corporate community leaders and talk about, well, we've had another situation. What are we going to do about it? And someone spoke up, I believe it was Tom Binford, and said, what we really don't have that we truly need is somewhere to have an ongoing conversation about race relations in this community.
And it was very important that it not be managed from the top down. The whole purpose of it was to get officials to listen, and race was one of those issues. Race in the police department was one of those issues. Equity with respect to inner city neighborhoods that didn't feel like their communities were receiving a fair shake from City Hall over the last, so many years. So we ended up recommending the Race Relations Network, but the idea of it came from the folks in the community themselves.
I was there at the outset of the network. We were executing on the Vision Indianapolis Tomorrow exercise. And when I think back, I would say that the then Race Relations Leadership Network really is maybe the outstanding thing that came out of that entire visioning that has lasted 25 years.
Our ambition was not to eliminate racism. Everybody learned the words of Kumbaya in 7 verses and languages. The idea was to just create a space where leadership could come together, as diverse as our leadership can be, and talk. Just talk among yourselves. And the expectation was that conversation with people who are normally out of your regular sphere of influence would influence how people think about our neighbors and our friends and our guests. And then ultimately, it would shorten the learning curve if something happens.
The meetings that I went to, it was a place for people to go and gripe. Somebody would stand, it was a big crowd that was there. You'd listen to it and you didn't solve anything, but it was a place for the people to air out what was bothering them the most. So I don't know, I think it went through some rough times where there wasn't much organization to it. And that took a long time for it to get to where it is today, because now they serve a purpose, they solve some of the problems, people listen to them, and I think that's important.
The network has done some instrumental, long-lasting things. The Citizens Complaint Board came out of the network, and that is still around, and that is something to be celebrated.
I was appointed by Mayor Goldsmith, along with the well-remembered and beloved Sam Jones, to co-chair the Community Police Relations Working Group, the Blue Ribbon Citizens Complaint Process Review. I was assured that it would be a matter of 3-4 months and we would be done. And Sam Jones and I started visioning and structuring the process. It ended up being nearly a 2-year effort, but it was very rewarding, and it was an important process because it came in the aftermath of many conflictual issues that had affected the city in relationship between the police and minority communities.
So one of the big, splashes was when the Klan decided Indianapolis was fertile material, fertile land to market and recruit.
As a city, through the auspices of the RCRLN, we were able to mobilize all of the museums in the city, the zoo, and a number of other organizations to be open for free on the same day as that rally.
And the purpose was to provide people an alternative to being reactionary to what might be going on. And it was incredible.
We leveraged a community-wide cultural event, communicated the important opportunity to have our community live the answer.
We had the Nation of Islam come to the network when they were very concerned with how they were beginning to be repressed.
There was an occasion when a number of members of the Nation of Islam were arrested for selling their goods on 38th Street.
We had been in the middle of discussions and negotiations with the mosque and with members to talk about rules of engagement, so to speak, on our city's street corners. And then the arrest happened, and it caused significant unrest on the day that those arrests happened.
That was a Thursday, and so the group was meeting on a Friday morning, the next Friday morning, and Deputy Mayor Susan Brooks helped those guys to come from jail to the meeting, and the Chief of Police, Chief Zunk, at that time also showed up at that meeting, and it became the start of a discussion that led to a set of protocols for how that situation would be dealt with in the future that was acceptable to all sides.
Because of the Race Relations Leadership Network, our community came together rather than what could have possibly happened, which might have been some significant unrest.
It's been interesting to expand the definition from just race to also culture, and to see the evolution of people's issues finally getting attention.
There was a young boy, about 9 years old, an African-American boy, who was run over by a car in a hit-and-run accident in an apartment complex on the west side. And the driver was a Latino man. There were a lot of witnesses. And he drove off and left the scene and was actually never apprehended, I don't believe.
My cell phone rang, I get on the phone, and it's Mayor Peterson. He said, "Get down here right away, we've got issues, and the neighborhood is all upset."
This was one of those things that felt a little bit like a lit fuse for a moment. And we immediately convened the Race Relations Leadership Network of GIPC. And within a few hours after this tragic accident, we were out at the apartment complex on the west side, all of us together.
Come down here, you'll see the issue, but I want to make sure that the Race Relations Leadership Network, which it was called at that time, Cultural wasn't in there yet, is on top of this.
And the reason why I came is because someone told me there's going to be a war in the streets between Blacks and Latinos. This was in 2000, and because there's an influx of Latinos in the community, and what we're seeing, what we're hearing in the streets is that there's going to be a war in the streets. It never happened. We were able to dissipate those conversations about that there was going to be a war by sitting at a table, looking at each other in the eye, and being able to say, no, it's okay, we're really going to be okay together.
When I first came in, what I realized was that talk about race is a binary issue in Indianapolis. It's black and white.
And by adding the word cultural, it seemed to make a difference. And so we were able to get more Latinos that felt it was important to be there. We also were able to get advocates for the homeless, as well as LGBTQ.
Race goes beyond just African Americans. And I'm not sure when Indianapolis and Indiana will get beyond that binary.
Well, there was a little bit of tension about, changing the name, expanding the purview, because people thought that it would take the light off of the problem that had not been resolved, the black-white issue.
There was some resistance, I remember, to changing the name, because the original focus of the network had been primarily African American, white relations, and some thought that that was the way in which it should continue. And while that it was still a primary concern, we came to realize that there were other ethnic groups, that there were other communities that needed to be at the table. So we expanded the table.
Whatever race relations is supposed to achieve, I don't know how you get there because it becomes inauthentic. Because at the end of the day, I'm always looking at you and saying, did you get more than me?
And there was a meeting in particular where very vocal is an understatement. And that was something that was, tempers were flaring, voices were being raised, and one particular, outspoken member of the network got up and said, this is not our issue. This is not something of concern to our community. It's not something that we want a focus on. He said, I don't know anyone who this will make a difference for. And he was very direct about that. And Reverend Jones, to his absolute credit, and this is just one example, but it sure stands out, stood at the front of that room and he said, if you think that this is not your issue, then let me tell you, that is because members of your family, members of your community do not love and trust you enough to tell you who they really are. And the room went silent.
For a number of years, it really became that cultural part of the name that was added, really became cultural when we started talking about public art, when we started talking about LGBTQ issues, when we started talking about Asian Americans, when we started talking about American Indians and have true representation, we started talking about women.
One of the things that I take great pride in is when the artwork for the cultural trails was being discussed and being planned, the network had a very, very strong involvement in ensuring that the African American community was well represented with the artwork on the cultural trail.
I was saying, no, we're not gonna have a submissive looking person kneeling down with his hands up like this.
Citizens again said, no, 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 we don't want that. And so Central Indiana Community Foundation came to GIPC and said, will you help us sort of reconcile, figure out what to do?
To develop a process that had never been developed before in the city, to be able to answer these questions and to see, okay, what is public art and how do we decide what public art is going to be displayed in our city?
We got civility, we got clarity, and once we got clarity, it was clear that we should not move on with that project. And but the committee played a beautiful role, and then the committee helped, facilitate what does the African American community, what would they like to see as representations, and it turned out to be a really nice piece that's on the Cultural Trail on the IUPUI campus in a very important historic spot.
Brian Payne, he changed the whole committee. Not too many people do that, especially white men with power.
The Arts Council is proud to partner with the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, and the new Cultural Arts Committee on the creation and installation of a new work of public art celebrating the rich history of Indianapolis's African American community.
But thanks to the involvement of the Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network, we were able to come up with a very dignified image that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren of all races can look at and say, that was the contribution of the African Americans to Indianapolis.
Our selection committee reconvened and selected artist Bernard Williams of Chicago to create the iconic piece of sculpture that will be installed along the Indianapolis Cultural Trail.
And I have to tell you that that was an explosion of conversation activity in a way that I have never seen it before in the network, but I have seen it in the network since then, which is really nice because I think it took us to another level.
To actually take the time to listen to understand, to appreciate, to reflect back on my culture as well, was absolutely instrumental to a personal growth that to this day I celebrate and cherish.
We have a leadership group that has been institutionalized, that's sustainable, and managed to have a meaningful conversation and more importantly, a process to address racially and culturally charged issues over a 25-year period of time. No city has done that.
I think that has been incredibly helpful for the city, and I think it could be and should be a model for the country.
The network has struggled sometimes to figure out what we should be doing. You know, are we behind the scenes, which we are. You know, this is like the greatest kept secret. A lot of people don't know that we're here. A lot of people do not know that whatever is in the news at the local, state, and national level is being discussed here, even international level, because eventually, you know, we're a global economy and all that. It's going to get here one way or another.
The most important role of the network is that it continued the dialogue about race relations, which is a topic that's never gone stale in America. What I appreciated about the Race Relations Leadership Network was that it was an opportunity for people to come in and honestly look at issues and express themselves openly in a safe environment where the end goal was not to further divide people, but to bring people together.
I personally like to go to the network because I learned things that I would not have learned otherwise, that I think for a lot of civic leaders, and especially white civic leaders, they're invisible to you, and other people in the community know them.
The worst thing we can do is ignore the problem and act like it doesn't exist. That's what I love about the network is every month, but actually twice a month, we're meeting and we're looking for action steps we can take to address these fundamental issues of equity and equality that need to be addressed in our community.
We had an officer-involved shooting when I first became chief, and the opportunity to come here in a controlled environment, but at the same time an environment where people felt like they could express everything that was in their mind and in their heart, and to be in a position with all the leaders of the city and all those who want well for every organization in the city, to have those difficult discussions and those crucial conversations so that we could get through that.
It's not that flashy, but to say we do things behind the scenes, we prevented something from getting worse, you know, that's hard to measure.
The community becomes empowered to address law enforcement and those underlying issues that we're talking about them today. And so how did you have it, knowing that those communities can have an impact in specific areas that may be driving the crime, rather than us always being on the back end. So when I go to other cities and talk about the cooperation and the network, it makes me feel good and it energizes me to come back and know that we have a city that cares.
I think the mission is about the same today as it was then, and that is to keep the lines of communications open, to keep people talking, to build trust within the community. We've definitely made progress, and if we can continue that progress in the next 25 years, we can be very proud of our work.
Light bulbs go off about, oh, well, you're doing this and I'm doing this, and maybe there's a way for us to cooperate in achieving something. I think that happens in some subtle way at almost every meeting. And that little pebble tossed into the pond has ripples that go out and affect things far beyond our ability to recognize them, but it doesn't mean they're not happening.
We wanted Indianapolis to be this open, welcoming community where all are respected, where there was harmony. That was our vision, you know, 25 years ago. We're not quite there yet, but I think we are making steps toward becoming that city. And I think that the RCRLN has been a part of that progress and that journey.